In the autumn of 1903, three brothers disappeared without a trace from their homestead in the remote Ozark Mountains of Missouri, leaving behind only empty cabins, scattered belongings, and a mystery that would haunt investigators for decades. What began as a simple missing persons case quickly unraveled into something far more disturbing when searchers discovered evidence suggesting that the Holloway brothers had not simply vanished, but had been preparing for something they believed was coming for them. The official records were sealed by federal marshals and hidden in government archives for over a century. But recently declassified documents reveal a case that challenged everything authorities thought they knew about the isolated communities of the Arkansas-Missouri border region and the ancient fears that still lingered in those forgotten hollows. The Holloway brothers, Ezekiel, Matthias, and Josiah, had lived in self-imposed isolation for nearly 2 decades in a valley so remote that it appeared on no official maps. Their nearest neighbors were 15 miles away through treacherous mountain terrain, and most locals believed the brothers had died years earlier. When the truth about their disappearance finally emerged, it would force investigators to confront the possibility that some mysteries are better left unsolved. The story begins not with the disappearance itself, but with the arrival of a stranger in the small town of Cedar Creek, Missouri, on October 15, 1903. The man, who gave his name only as Samuel, appeared at the local general store just before closing time, his clothes torn, and his face bearing the hollow expression of someone who had witnessed something beyond comprehension. Cedar Creek was the kind of place where strangers were noticed immediately, and Samuel's appearance caused considerable stir among the townspeople. He was tall and lean, with prematurely grey hair and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at the people around him. Most unsettling was his insistence on speaking only in whispers, claiming that voices carried too far in these mountains, and that certain things should not be overheard. Store owner Marcus Webb later described Samuel as the most frightened man he had ever encountered. The stranger purchased only basic supplies, salt, matches, and a small quantity of silver coins from Webb's modest collection of curiosities. When Webb asked about his destination, Samuel simply pointed toward the high peaks to the north and said he was looking for the Holloway place. Webb tried to dissuade him, explaining that the Holloway brothers had not been seen in town for over 2 years, and that most folks assumed they had either died or moved on. The trails to their homestead were dangerous even for experienced woodsmen, and winter was approaching fast. But Samuel was insistent, producing a leather-bound journal and showing Webb a hand-drawn map that depicted the valley where the brothers lived with startling accuracy. The map troubled Webb for reasons he could not articulate. It showed not only the geographic features of the region, but also strange symbols scattered throughout the territory, symbols that resembled no writing system Webb had ever seen. When he asked Samuel about these markings, the stranger's expression darkened considerably. "Those mark the old places," Samuel said, his voice barely audible. "The places where the mountain remembers what came before. The Holloway boys. They know about the old places. That is why I need to find them before the moon turns dark again." Webb noticed that Samuel's hands shook as he folded the map away, and that the man kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting to see something watching from the darkness outside. When Samuel left the store that evening, he was carrying a lantern despite the fact that it was still daylight, and Webb observed him checking the shadows between buildings before hurrying toward the mountain trail. That was the last time anyone in Cedar Creek saw Samuel alive. 3 days later, on October 18th, a hunting party led by local guide Tom Patterson discovered Samuel's body in a ravine approximately 8 miles from town. The circumstances of his death were immediately puzzling to the men who found him. Samuel appeared to have fallen from a considerable height, but there were no cliffs or steep drops in the immediate area. Moreover, his body showed signs of exposure that suggested he had been dead for far longer than 3 days. Dr. Jonathan Mills, the only physician within 50 miles, was summoned to examine the remains. Mills had served as a field surgeon during the Spanish-American War and was accustomed to determining cause of death under difficult circumstances. But Samuel's condition confounded his medical expertise entirely. The deceased appeared to have died of exposure and dehydration, Mills wrote in his official report. However, the degree of decomposition is inconsistent with the timeline established by witness accounts. Furthermore, the position of the body and the nature of the injuries suggest that the subject fell repeatedly from various heights over an extended period, as if he had been wandering in circles for days or weeks rather than hours. Mills also noted something that he recorded in his private journal but omitted from the official report. Samuel's clothing was torn in a pattern that suggested he had been grasping at something repeatedly, and his fingernails were worn down to the quick as if he had been clawing at stone or bark. Most disturbing was the expression frozen on the dead man's face, which Mills described as one of absolute terror, combined with a strange sort of recognition, as if Samuel had finally seen something he had been expecting, but hoped never to encounter. Among Samuel's possessions, searchers found the leather journal and map he had shown to Webb, but the pages had been torn out and scattered throughout the ravine. The few fragments that could be recovered contained references to historical events and folklore associated with the Ozark region, including several mentions of disappearances dating back to the early 1800s. One partially legible page contained what appeared to be a warning written in Samuel's handwriting. They were right to hide. The mountain takes what it is owed, and the debt grows larger each year. The discovery of Samuel's body might have been dismissed as a tragic accident involving an inexperienced traveler, but his death occurred at a time when other strange reports were coming from the high mountain regions. Over the course of October 1903, 3 separate hunting parties reported finding abandoned campsites that showed signs of hasty departure, with food still cooking over fires and personal belongings scattered as if the occupants had fled in panic. More troubling were reports from the few homesteaders who lived in the foothills. Several families reported hearing sounds at night that defied explanation, rhythmic pounding that seemed to come from deep within the mountains, voices calling in languages that no one recognized, and a low humming that made livestock nervous and caused dogs to howl continuously until dawn. Martha Kellerman, whose family owned a small farm on the eastern slopes, described waking repeatedly to find that her chickens had arranged themselves in perfect circles in their coops, all facing outward as if watching for something approaching from every direction. Her husband found tracks around their property that he initially assumed belonged to bears, but the prints showed a gait and stride pattern unlike any animal he had ever encountered. The Kellermans also reported seeing lights moving through the forest at night, not the steady glow of lanterns or torches, but flickering illumination that appeared and disappeared without pattern or purpose. On 2 occasions, Martha observed these lights approaching their cabin, only to watch them suddenly retreat when her husband stepped outside with his rifle. It was in this atmosphere of growing unease that Sheriff Daniel Crawford made the decision to organize an official search for the Holloway brothers. Crawford had been reluctant to venture into the high country during the best of circumstances, but the accumulating reports of strange activity convinced him that a formal investigation was necessary. If the Holloway brothers were still alive, they might be able to provide explanations for the disturbing events. If they were dead, their fate might offer clues about what was happening in the mountains. Crawford assembled a search party consisting of 6 experienced woodsmen, including Tom Patterson and 2 Cherokee guides who knew the high country better than any white men in the region. The Cherokee men, Joseph Ridge and William Thornton, were initially reluctant to participate in the expedition, expressing concerns that went beyond simple caution about difficult terrain. Ridge, who served as the primary spokesman for the pair, told Crawford that his people had avoided the upper reaches of these particular mountains for generations. There were places in the high country, Ridge explained, where the earth remembered things that had happened long before European settlers arrived, and some of those memories were dangerous to disturb. The Cherokee spoke of the mountains as if they were alive, possessing their own intentions and desires. According to their oral traditions, certain valleys and peaks served as gateways or boundaries, places where the normal rules of existence became unreliable. Ridge warned that people who ventured into these areas sometimes returned changed, if they returned at all, and that the changes were not always visible from the outside. Crawford, despite his respect for Cherokee wisdom, was committed to conducting the search. He convinced Ridge and Thornton to serve as guides by emphasizing that their knowledge might be essential for bringing the expedition home safely. The Cherokee agreed, but insisted on certain precautions that seemed strange to the other members of the party. Ridge required that each man carry a small pouch of specific herbs and minerals, explaining that these materials would help them remain anchored to their own world while traveling through places where reality might become unstable. He also insisted that the party travel only during daylight hours and that they maintain constant verbal contact with each other, as silence could indicate that someone had become separated in ways that normal tracking methods could not detect. Most importantly, Ridge warned that they must never respond to voices calling from the woods unless they could see the speaker clearly, and that under no circumstances should they follow lights or investigate sounds that seemed to be leading them away from their intended path. The mountain, he explained, was skilled at creating illusions designed to lure people into areas from which they could not return. The search party departed Cedar Creek on October 25, 1903, following the map that had been found among Samuel's belongings. The first day of travel passed without incident, taking them through familiar terrain that most of the men had hunted or trapped in previous years. But as they climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape began to display subtle peculiarities that made even the most experienced woodsman uncomfortable. Trees grew in formations that seemed deliberately arranged, creating natural corridors that led toward specific destinations rather than following the random patterns typical of wilderness growth. Rock formations displayed symmetries that suggested intelligent design, and streams followed courses that appeared to violate the basic principles of water flow and gravity. Patterson, who had spent most of his adult life in these mountains, found himself repeatedly disoriented by landmarks that seemed familiar but were positioned incorrectly relative to each other. Compass readings became unreliable, pointing in directions that shifted without apparent cause, and the sun's position in the sky often disagreed with the time indicated by their pocket watches. By the second day, the party was traveling through territory that none of them recognized, despite following a trail that appeared well used and clearly marked. The Cherokee guides became increasingly tense, frequently stopping to listen for sounds that the other men could not hear and occasionally insisting that the party change direction for reasons they could not or would not explain. It was on the third day that they discovered the first cabin. The structure appeared suddenly in a clearing that should have been visible from miles away, but had somehow remained hidden until they were practically standing in front of it. The cabin was larger than most homesteads in the region, built from logs that had been fitted together with exceptional skill and craftsmanship. But the building showed clear signs of recent abandonment, with doors standing open and personal belongings scattered in the yard. Inside the cabin, the search party found evidence of hasty departure. Meals had been left half-eaten on the table, clothes were scattered on the floor as if their owners had changed quickly, and a pot of stew still hung over the fireplace, though the fire had long since burned out. Most puzzling was the discovery of 3 separate sleeping areas, each personalized with different books, tools, and personal items, suggesting that the cabin had been occupied by the 3 Holloway brothers. Crawford's investigation of the cabin revealed several disturbing details. All of the windows had been covered from the inside with heavy blankets, creating an environment of complete darkness, even during daylight hours. The door frames showed evidence of recent reinforcement, as if the occupants had been trying to secure the structure against forced entry. Most unsettling was the discovery of what appeared to be a calendar, scratched into the wall near the main fireplace, with dates marked in a pattern that made no sense according to any standard system of timekeeping. The calendar showed months that contained varying numbers of days, weeks that lasted for different lengths, and year markings that suggested the occupants had been tracking time according to some system unrelated to normal chronology. The final entry on the calendar, scratched more deeply into the wood than the others, was a date that corresponded to October 20th, 1903, just 5 days before the search party had begun their expedition. Ridge examined the calendar closely and reported that the markings resembled certain Cherokee methods for tracking celestial events, but with modifications that he did not recognize. The pattern suggested that whoever had created the calendar was monitoring something cyclical, an event or phenomenon that occurred according to its own schedule rather than following the normal progression of days and seasons. While the men investigated the cabin's interior, Thornton explored the surrounding area and made a discovery that added another layer of mystery to the case. Approximately 50 yards behind the cabin, he found a second structure that had been carefully concealed behind a natural rock formation. This building was smaller than the main cabin, but appeared to have been constructed more recently, using different materials and techniques. The hidden cabin was empty except for a collection of handwritten journals and a large quantity of preserved food that appeared to have been stockpiled over a period of years. The journals, written in different handwriting styles that suggested multiple authors, contained detailed observations about the behavior of local wildlife, weather patterns, and astronomical phenomena. But they also included increasingly frequent references to something the writers called the convergence, an event they believed was approaching and for which they had been preparing. The journal entries revealed that the Holloway brothers had not been living in isolation by choice, but had been monitoring and documenting something they considered to be a serious threat to the surrounding region. According to their records, they had observed a pattern of disturbances that occurred in roughly 20-year cycles, each time growing stronger and affecting a wider area. The brothers had documented disappearances of both people and animals, unexplained changes in local geography, and atmospheric anomalies that seemed to center on a specific location deeper in the mountains. They believed that these events were building towards something they called the Great Convergence, a climactic occurrence that would have consequences extending far beyond the Ozark region. One journal entry, dated just weeks before the brothers' disappearance, provided a chilling description of their final preparations. The signs are unmistakable now. The mountain pulse grows stronger each night, and the old boundaries are beginning to weaken. We have prepared as much as possible, but I fear our precautions may not be sufficient. If we do not return from the high place, may these records serve as warning to those who come after. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. The high place referenced in the journal appeared to be a specific location that the brothers had been studying for years. Their records included detailed maps and observations about a valley located in the deepest part of the mountain range, a place they described as the source of the disturbances they had been monitoring. According to their notes, this valley contained geological features and atmospheric conditions that defied conventional explanation. Crawford made the decision to continue searching for the brothers, despite growing concerns about the safety of his expedition. The discovery of the cabins proved that the Holloway brothers had been alive recently, and the urgency in their journal entries suggested that they might be in immediate danger. But the Cherokee guides became increasingly reluctant to proceed deeper into the mountains, warning that they were approaching areas that their people considered forbidden. Ridge explained that Cherokee oral traditions spoke of places where the earth itself was unstable, where the normal laws of nature could not be relied upon to protect travelers. These locations were marked by specific signs that the current expedition was beginning to encounter: unusual rock formations, plants growing in impossible configurations, and a persistent sense of being observed by unseen watchers. The guides also reported sensing what they described as wrongness in the air itself, a quality that made breathing difficult and caused feelings of disorientation and dread. Thornton, who was normally the more talkative of the two Cherokee men, had become increasingly quiet and spent much of his time looking over his shoulder as if expecting to see something following the party. On the fourth day of the search, the expedition encountered their first directly threatening phenomenon. While crossing a stream that appeared perfectly normal, two of the party members, including Crawford himself, suddenly found themselves unable to move. They remained conscious and aware, but could not control their own movements, as if some external force had taken control of their bodies. The affected men reported feeling as though they were being examined by an intelligence that was vast and utterly alien to human experience. During the several minutes that the paralysis lasted, they experienced visions or impressions of the mountain range, as it had existed in prehistoric times, populated by entities that bore no resemblance to any known form of life. Ridge and Thornton immediately began performing what appeared to be a cleansing ritual, using the herbs they had insisted the party carry, and speaking in Cherokee languages that the other men did not understand. The paralysis ended as suddenly as it had begun, but Crawford and his companion retained vivid memories of their experience that would haunt them for the remainder of their lives. The Cherokee guides insisted that the party had entered territory where normal protective measures were insufficient. They explained that the mountain itself was aware of their presence and was testing their intentions and their strength. Ridge warned that further progress toward the high place would require the party to abandon their normal understanding of reality and accept that they were traveling through a region where different rules applied. Despite the obvious dangers, Crawford decided to continue the search. The journals found in the hidden cabin had convinced him that the Holloway brothers were involved in something far more significant than a simple case of missing persons. If their records were accurate, the brothers had been monitoring a threat that could affect thousands of people throughout the region. Their disappearance might be connected to an attempt to prevent or mitigate some kind of catastrophic event. The party's progress became increasingly difficult as they climbed higher into the mountains. The terrain itself seemed to resist their advance, with trails that led in circles, streams that flowed uphill, and landmarks that appeared in different locations each time they were observed. The men began experiencing what Ridge called displacement, finding themselves in locations they had not consciously traveled to, with no memory of how they had arrived there. Time became unreliable in ways that went beyond simple disorientation. Watches stopped working or displayed times that disagreed with the position of the sun, and the men found themselves unable to agree on how long they had been traveling or how much daylight remained. Patterson reported feeling as though he was moving through thick liquid rather than normal air, while other party members described sensations of weightlessness or sudden changes in gravity. Most disturbing were the voices they began to hear calling from various directions in the forest. The voices sounded human, and often seemed to belong to people the men knew, calling their names and asking for help. But Ridge had warned them not to respond to these calls, explaining that the mountain was skilled at creating auditory illusions designed to separate travelers from their companions. On one occasion, Crawford heard what appeared to be his wife calling his name from a grove of trees to the east of their path. The voice was so convincing that he began walking toward it before Thornton physically restrained him. When the party investigated the area where the voice had seemed to originate, they found only empty forest, but the ground showed circular patterns of dead vegetation that suggested something had been present there recently. It was on the 5th day of their expedition that the search party finally located the valley that the Holloway brothers had called the High Place. The valley appeared without warning as the party crested a ridge that should have provided a view of the surrounding peaks. Instead, they found themselves looking down into a depression that seemed to exist independently of the surrounding geography, as if it had been carved from a different type of reality and inserted into the normal landscape. The valley defied basic principles of geology and physics. Water flowed upward along its sides, disappearing into the sky rather than collecting at the bottom. Plant life grew in spiraling patterns that created optical illusions when viewed directly, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with energy that made it difficult to focus on any single object for more than a few seconds. At the center of the valley stood a structure that none of the men could adequately describe in their later reports. It appeared to be simultaneously ancient and newly constructed, made from materials that resembled stone but reflected light in ways that normal rock could not. The structure's architecture followed principles that seemed designed for inhabitants with different spatial relationships than humans, featuring doorways and windows that existed at impossible angles and surfaces that curved in directions that should not have been possible. Ridge and Thornton refused to enter the valley, explaining that Cherokee traditions specifically forbade approaching such places during certain astronomical conditions. They pointed out that the position of the stars, visible in the afternoon sky above the valley, did not match the constellations that should have been visible from their geographic location at that time of year. The guides also reported sensing the presence of something vast and intelligent within the valley, something that was aware of their observation and was deciding how to respond to their intrusion. They warned that approaching the central structure would constitute a direct challenge to forces that humans were not equipped to confront, and that the consequences of such a confrontation would extend far beyond the immediate danger to the search party. Crawford faced an impossible decision. The valley clearly represented the source of the phenomena that the Holloway brothers had been monitoring, and their disappearance was almost certainly connected to this location. But approaching the central structure would require his men to enter an environment where normal physical laws could not be trusted, and where their very survival might depend on factors they could not understand or control. While Crawford deliberated, Patterson made a discovery that added urgency to their situation. Using binoculars to observe the central structure, he reported seeing movement within the building, shadows that moved independently of any visible light source and shapes that suggested the presence of multiple individuals. Most significantly, he observed what appeared to be 3 human figures standing near the structure's base, too distant to identify clearly, but matching the general size and proportions of the missing Holloway brothers. The figures appeared to be engaged in some kind of systematic activity, moving in coordinated patterns around the structure's perimeter and occasionally disappearing inside the building before emerging at different locations. Their movements suggested purpose and intelligence, but also displayed a mechanical quality that made Patterson doubt whether the figures were acting according to their own will. Ridge examined the valley through the binoculars and reported observations that troubled him deeply. The figures that Patterson had identified as potentially human cast shadows that moved in directions unrelated to the position of the sun, and their movements followed patterns that resembled certain Cherokee ceremonial dances, but with modifications that suggested the original purposes had been corrupted or perverted. More disturbing was Ridge's observation that the valley itself appeared to be responding to the presence of the figures, with changes in the flow of the upward-flowing water and shifts in the spiraling patterns of the plant growth. The valley seemed to be alive in some sense, and the figures were either controlling its behavior or serving as conduits for some external intelligence that was directing its activities. Crawford realized that a direct rescue attempt would be futile and possibly suicidal. If the Holloway brothers were indeed the figures observed in the valley, they had either been transformed by their exposure to whatever forces operated there, or they were being controlled by entities that could manipulate human behavior. In either case, approaching them would likely result in the search party suffering the same fate. The decision was made to withdraw from the valley and return to Cedar Creek with the information they had gathered. But the journey back proved to be far more treacherous than their initial approach to the high place. The mountain seemed determined to prevent their departure, creating obstacles and diversions that threatened to trap the party permanently in the high country. Trails that they had followed successfully during their ascent no longer led in the same directions, and landmarks that had served as navigation points appeared in unexpected locations or had vanished entirely. The Cherokee guides reported that the mountain was angry about their intrusion into the Forbidden Valley and was attempting to extract payment for their transgression. The party's escape from the mountains became a race against time and an increasingly hostile environment. They found themselves traveling through landscapes that shifted around them, following paths that led through forests that had not existed hours earlier, and crossing streams that flowed in directions that violated basic geographic principles. On their second day of retreat, the expedition encountered evidence that they were not the only travelers attempting to leave the high country. They discovered abandoned campsites that showed signs of recent occupation, but the belongings left behind included items that had been manufactured decades earlier, suggesting that previous expeditions had become trapped in the mountains for extended periods. Most unsettling was the discovery of journal entries written by travelers who claimed to have been attempting to escape the mountains for months or years, despite having adequate supplies for only days of travel. These writers described a condition they called temporal displacement, in which normal time became unreliable, and travelers could find themselves experiencing the same day repeatedly or aging rapidly during short periods. The journal entries also contained warnings about entities that the previous travelers had encountered during their attempts to escape. These beings were described as resembling humans, but displaying behaviors and capabilities that marked them as something fundamentally different. They appeared to serve as guardians or sentries for the mountain, ensuring that certain areas remained undisturbed and that specific types of knowledge did not leave the high country. Ridge and Thornton recognized these descriptions from Cherokee oral traditions, which spoke of mountain spirits that protected sacred places from contamination by the outside world. These entities were not necessarily malevolent, the guides explained, but they were implacably dedicated to maintaining the boundaries between different types of existence. People who ventured into forbidden areas might be prevented from leaving, not as punishment, but as a necessary measure to prevent them from carrying dangerous influences back to the normal world. The search party's escape was ultimately successful, but only after they agreed to certain conditions that Ridge negotiated with forces that the other men could not see or hear. The Cherokee guide spent several hours in what appeared to be meditation or prayer. after which he announced that the mountain would allow their departure in exchange for specific commitments about what they would report to the outside world. Ridge explained that the knowledge they had gained during their expedition carried the potential to attract additional intrusions into the high country, possibly triggering the very catastrophe that the Holloway brothers had been trying to prevent. The search party would be permitted to return to Cedar Creek, but they would be required to limit their official reports to basic facts about the brothers' disappearance, omitting details about the valley and the phenomena they had observed. Crawford initially resisted these restrictions, arguing that the public had a right to know about the potential dangers in the mountains. But Ridge warned that disclosure of certain information would inevitably lead to expeditions by treasure seekers, scientists, and curiosity seekers, all of whom would contribute to the destabilization of forces that were currently being held in check by the brothers' presence in the valley. The Cherokee guide also explained that the Holloway brothers had not been victims of the phenomena they had been studying, but had voluntarily accepted roles as guardians or monitors, sacrificing their normal human existence to prevent something far worse from escaping the high country. Their disappearance was not a tragedy to be investigated, but a sacrifice to be honored by ensuring that their work continued without interference. The search party returned to Cedar Creek on November 3, 1903, after an expedition that had officially lasted 9 days, but felt to the participants as though it had extended for weeks or months. Crawford filed a report that described the discovery of abandoned cabins and evidence suggesting that the Holloway brothers had left the area voluntarily, possibly to seek opportunities in other regions. The official record contained no mention of the valley, the phenomena observed in the high country, or the Cherokee guide's explanations about the true nature of the brothers' disappearance. Crawford's private journal, discovered decades later, revealed his struggle with the decision to conceal information that he believed the public should know, but also his growing understanding that some knowledge carried responsibilities that transcended normal considerations of transparency and accountability. In the weeks following the expedition's return, several members of the search party experienced continuing effects from their exposure to the forces in the mountains. Patterson reported persistent disorientation and difficulty maintaining normal sleep patterns, as if his internal chronometer had been permanently disrupted. Other men described dreams or visions involving the valley and its central structure, along with growing certainty that their presence there had set in motion events that would have consequences extending far into the future. Most significantly, Ridge and Thornton reported receiving communications from Cherokee communities throughout the region, all describing increased activity in their traditional sacred sites and a growing sense that the boundaries between different worlds were becoming unstable. The tribal elders interpreted these signs as confirmation that the expedition to the high place had triggered changes that would require careful monitoring and possible intervention. The Cherokee response to the crisis involved the activation of ancient protocols for dealing with supernatural threats, including the positioning of trained observers at strategic locations throughout the mountain range and the implementation of protective rituals designed to reinforce the barriers between normal reality and the forces contained in the high country. These measures appeared to be successful, as reports of strange phenomena in the region decreased significantly in the months following the expedition. But Cherokee oral traditions indicated that the stabilization was temporary and that the forces contained in the high place would eventually require more direct intervention. The fate of the Holloway brothers remained officially unknown, but Ridge privately shared with Crawford information suggesting that the brothers had become part of a system of guardians that extended throughout the Ozark Range and possibly beyond. According to Cherokee traditions, certain individuals were chosen or called to serve as bridges between different types of existence, sacrificing their normal human lives to maintain the stability of boundaries that protected both worlds from mutual contamination. These guardians retained their essential humanity, but gained capabilities and perspectives that allowed them to perceive and interact with forces that normal humans could not comprehend. They served terms of service that might extend for decades or centuries, during which they remained connected to, but separate from normal human society. Ridge suggested that the Holloway brothers had recognized their calling and had accepted the responsibilities that came with their unique situation. Their disappearance was not an ending, but a transformation, and their continued presence in the high place was essential for preventing the type of catastrophic event that their journals had warned about. Crawford struggled with these explanations for the remainder of his life, torn between his respect for Cherokee wisdom and his training as a law enforcement officer committed to facts and evidence. His private journals reveal a man grappling with experiences that challenged his fundamental understanding of reality, while trying to maintain his effectiveness as a public servant responsible for the safety of his community. The case of the Holloway brothers officially remained open in Crawford's files, but no further official search efforts were mounted. Periodic reports of strange activity in the high country continued to reach the sheriff's office, but these were generally dismissed as folklore or exaggeration unless they involved clear threats to public safety. The restriction on information about the high place proved to be partially effective, as the remote location and difficulty of access naturally limited the number of people willing to attempt the journey. But the case attracted the attention of researchers and writers interested in unexplained phenomena, and stories about the vanished brothers began to circulate in publications devoted to mysterious disappearances and supernatural occurrences. These accounts were generally dismissed by mainstream sources as regional folklore, but they helped establish the Ozark Mountains as a destination for people seeking encounters with unexplained phenomena. The increase in visits to the high country created new challenges for the Cherokee communities tasked with monitoring the region, and occasionally required direct intervention to prevent inexperienced explorers from endangering themselves and others. In 1923, exactly 20 years after the Holloway brothers' disappearance, the region experienced a series of disturbances that seemed to confirm the cyclical nature of the phenomena they had been monitoring. Reports of strange lights, unexplained sounds, and missing persons increased dramatically throughout the Ozark Range, and several communities reported livestock behavior and environmental anomalies similar to those documented in 1903. Cherokee observers noted that these disturbances were more intense than those recorded during the previous cycle, suggesting that the containment measures implemented after the original incident were beginning to weaken. Tribal leaders made the decision to share limited information with selected federal authorities, hoping to establish official support for more comprehensive protective measures. This outreach led to the involvement of a newly established federal agency tasked with investigating unexplained phenomena that might pose threats to national security. Agent Marcus Webb, a descendant of the Cedar Creek store owner who had first encountered Samuel, was assigned to coordinate the government response to the situation in the Ozarks. Webb's investigation revealed that similar cycles of disturbances had been documented throughout American history, often coinciding with reports of missing persons and unexplained phenomena in remote areas. The federal government had been quietly monitoring these patterns since the late 1800s, but had lacked the resources and knowledge necessary to develop effective intervention strategies. The Ozark investigation became a testing ground for new approaches to managing supernatural threats, combining traditional indigenous knowledge with modern scientific methods and government resources. The collaboration between Cherokee communities and federal agencies established precedents that would influence the government's response to similar situations throughout the 20th century. The specific fate of the Holloway brothers was never officially determined, but evidence gathered during the federal investigation suggested that they had indeed become part of a larger system of guardians operating throughout the region. Webb's classified reports described encounters with individuals who matched the brothers' descriptions, but displayed capabilities and knowledge that exceeded normal human limitations. These encounters typically occurred during critical situations when the barriers between different types of reality were under stress, and the individuals in question would appear to provide assistance or guidance before disappearing back into the wilderness. Cherokee observers confirmed that these appearances matched traditional accounts of guardian spirits, but with the unique characteristic that the entities retained clearly human origins and personalities. The federal investigation also revealed that the Holloway brothers' sacrifice had been successful in preventing the catastrophic event that their journals had predicted. Analysis of geological and atmospheric data indicated that the disturbances in the high country had been building towards some type of dimensional rupture that could have had global consequences. The brothers' voluntary transformation into guardians had provided the stability necessary to contain the crisis, but at the cost of their normal human existence. They had become permanent residents of the boundary region between different types of reality, charged with monitoring and maintaining the barriers that protected both worlds from mutual contamination. This sacrifice was honored by both Cherokee communities and federal authorities, though the specific details remained classified for reasons of national security. The Holloway brothers were officially listed as missing persons, but their true fate was recorded in documents that would remain sealed for decades to prevent the kind of publicity that might attract additional intrusions into the high country. The legacy of the Holloway brothers continued to influence events in the Ozark region throughout the 20th century. Their presence as guardians provided stability during subsequent cycles of disturbance, and their experience served as a model for training other individuals who might be called to similar service. The federal agency responsible for monitoring supernatural threats developed protocols based on lessons learned from the Ozark investigation, emphasizing cooperation with indigenous communities and respect for traditional knowledge about the management of boundary regions. These protocols proved essential for handling similar crises in other parts of the country. The story of the Holloway brothers also contributed to a growing understanding among researchers that the boundary between normal reality and other types of existence was more fragile than previously believed. The brothers' experience demonstrated that maintaining this boundary required active intervention, and that some individuals might be uniquely suited to serve as guardians or monitors. Modern investigations into the case have been limited by the continued classification of federal documents and the Cherokee community's understandable reluctance to share sensitive information with outsiders. But declassified materials released in recent years have confirmed many of the basic facts about the brothers' disappearance and the nature of the phenomena they were monitoring. Contemporary researchers have identified similar patterns of cyclical disturbances in other regions, suggesting that the Ozark case represents part of a larger system of supernatural activity that spans the entire North American continent. The guardians established in various regions appear to maintain communication with each other and coordinate their activities to ensure global stability. The sacrifice of the Holloway brothers stands as a testament to the reality of forces beyond normal human understanding and the courage of individuals willing to accept extraordinary responsibilities for the protection of their communities. Their disappearance was not a tragedy but a transformation, and their continued service as guardians represents hope that the boundaries between different types of existence can be maintained through human dedication and sacrifice. Recent developments in the case have added new layers of complexity to the story. In 2019, during a routine geological survey of the Ozark region, researchers discovered a series of underground chambers that appeared to be connected to the valley system where the Holloway brothers had vanished. These chambers contained evidence of human habitation spanning multiple centuries, suggesting that the Guardian system was far older and more extensive than previously understood. The chambers revealed artifacts and writings that indicated the presence of guardians from various time periods, including individuals who had disappeared during well-documented historical events. Personal items found in the chambers matched descriptions from missing person cases dating back to the early 1800s, confirming that the transformation experienced by the Holloway brothers was part of a pattern that had been repeating for generations. Most significantly, the chambers contained recent materials that suggested the current guardians were actively monitoring and responding to contemporary threats. Modern equipment, including communication devices and scientific instruments, indicated that the Guardian system had evolved to incorporate new technologies while maintaining its essential protective functions. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead researcher on the geological survey, reported finding journal entries written in contemporary handwriting that documented ongoing efforts to maintain stability in the boundary regions. These entries referenced global events and environmental changes that posed new challenges to the Guardian system, requiring adaptations of traditional methods and the recruitment of additional personnel. The journals also contained warnings about emerging threats that the current Guardians considered more dangerous than any previous challenges. Climate change, industrial development, and increased human population density were creating unprecedented stress on the boundary regions, potentially overwhelming the containment systems that had protected both worlds for centuries. Chen's team also discovered evidence that the Guardian system extended far beyond the Ozark region, with similar installations identified in remote areas throughout North America and possibly other continents. The global scope of the operation suggested that the phenomena contained in these regions represented a threat to planetary stability rather than merely local concerns. The federal agencies responsible for monitoring these sites have classified Chen's findings at the highest levels of secrecy, but leaked documents indicate that emergency protocols are being developed to address the possibility that traditional containment methods may no longer be sufficient. These protocols reportedly include contingency plans for mass evacuation of civilian populations from affected regions and the establishment of expanded Guardian networks in strategic locations. The Cherokee communities involved in the original incident have reported increased activity in their sacred sites and growing difficulty maintaining communication with the traditional Guardians. Tribal elders have expressed concerns that the acceleration of global changes may be approaching a threshold beyond which the current protective systems cannot adapt quickly enough to prevent catastrophic breaches. These developments have led to renewed interest in the fate of the Holloway brothers and the possibility that their experience might provide insights essential for addressing the expanding crisis. Attempts to establish direct contact with the Guardians have been partially successful, but the communications received have been fragmentary and often difficult to interpret. The messages that have been decoded suggest that the original Guardians, including the Holloway brothers, remain active and aware of current conditions. They have apparently been working to train and support new Guardians while adapting their methods to address threats that did not exist during their original transformation. However, the communications also indicate that the Guardians are operating under severe constraints and may not be able to maintain their protective functions indefinitely without additional support. The messages contain urgent requests for specific types of assistance, including the recruitment of individuals with particular skills and backgrounds who might be suited for Guardian training. The selection criteria for potential Guardians appear to be highly specific, involving psychological, physical, and spiritual characteristics that cannot be easily identified through conventional screening methods. The Cherokee communities have traditionally served as intermediaries in this selection process, but the current crisis may require the development of new recruitment and training systems. Federal authorities have begun implementing programs designed to identify and prepare potential Guardians, though the specific details of these programs remain classified. The urgency of the situation has led to collaboration between government agencies, academic institutions, and indigenous communities in ways that would have been impossible during earlier periods of the crisis. The legacy of the Holloway brothers continues to influence these efforts, as their successful transformation provides a model for what can be achieved when individuals are willing to sacrifice their normal lives for the protection of their communities. Their example has inspired a new generation of potential Guardians who understand that some responsibilities transcend personal considerations and require absolute commitment to service. The story of the three brothers who vanished in the Ozarks over a century ago has thus evolved from a simple missing persons case into a foundational narrative for understanding humanity's relationship with forces beyond our normal perception. Their sacrifice established precedents that continue to guide efforts to maintain the delicate balance between different types of existence. As global conditions continue to change and new threats emerge, the wisdom gained from the Holloway brothers' experience becomes increasingly valuable. Their transformation demonstrated that human consciousness can adapt to perceive and interact with phenomena that normally remain hidden, and that such adaptation can serve protective functions that benefit both the individuals involved and the larger community. The Guardians they became represent hope that humanity possesses the potential to evolve in response to existential challenges, developing capabilities that allow us to serve as protectors and maintainers of cosmic stability. Their story reminds us that some mysteries are not meant to be solved but to be lived, and that the greatest courage may lie in accepting transformation rather than fighting to maintain familiar limitations. The mountains of the Ozarks continue to hold their secrets, but those secrets are no longer entirely hidden from human understanding. The Holloway brothers and their fellow guardians stand watch in the spaces between worlds, ensuring that the boundaries remain stable and that both sides of reality can continue to exist in relative safety. Their vigil may be eternal, but it is not lonely. Each generation produces individuals who hear the call to guardian service, who recognize their responsibility to protect the delicate equilibrium that makes normal life possible. The brothers from 1903 were among the first to answer this call in the modern era, but they will not be the last. In the end, the case of the Holloway brothers teaches us that disappearance can be transformation, that sacrifice can be service, and that some mysteries are meant to be embraced rather than solved. Their story continues to unfold in the hidden places of the world, where dedicated individuals maintain their watch over forces that could reshape reality itself. The next time you find yourself in remote wilderness, particularly in places where the boundaries between the known and unknown seem thin, remember the Holloway brothers and their sacrifice. They may be watching from their posts between worlds, ensuring that your journey remains safe and that the mysteries you encounter remain manageable. Their legacy reminds us that some people are called to serve in ways that transcend normal human experience, and that such service, while demanding ultimate sacrifice, provides meaning and purpose that extends far beyond individual existence. The brothers who vanished in 1903 found their true calling in disappearance, and their story continues to inspire those who understand that the greatest adventures sometimes require leaving everything familiar behind. The macabre case of the Holloway brothers thus stands not as a tale of loss, but as an account of transformation, not as a mystery to be solved, but as a calling to be answered by those brave enough to step into the spaces between worlds and take up the eternal watch that protects us all. The continuing investigation into the Holloway case has revealed additional layers of complexity that extend far beyond the original disappearance in 1903. Recent archaeological discoveries in the Ozarks region have uncovered evidence of guardian systems dating back thousands of years, suggesting that the phenomenon observed by the brothers was part of an ancient cycle that predates European colonization of North America. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, a specialist in pre-Columbian archaeology from the University of Arkansas, led a team that discovered a series of stone formations in the high country that appear to have been constructed according to astronomical alignments that track celestial events occurring on multi-century cycles. These formations show clear evidence of maintenance and modification over extended periods, indicating continuous human involvement in their operation. The stone circles, as Thornfield's team designated them, incorporate architectural elements that match descriptions found in the Holloway brothers' journals, suggesting that the brothers had discovered and were attempting to understand a system that had been operating for millennia. Carbon dating of organic materials found within the formations indicated human activity spanning at least 3,000 years, with the most recent evidence dating to the early 20th century. More significantly, Thornfield's excavations revealed burial sites associated with the stone circles that contained remains of individuals from various time periods, all showing similar patterns of preservation that suggested their deaths had occurred under unusual circumstances. The skeletal remains displayed characteristics that indicated these individuals had undergone physiological changes during their lifetimes, developing bone density and muscular attachments that exceeded normal human parameters. Analysis of artifacts found with the remains revealed personal items spanning centuries of human habitation in the region, including Native American tools and ornaments, colonial-era equipment, and more recent materials that could be traced to specific missing person cases from the 19th and early 20th centuries. The diversity of these artifacts suggested that the Guardian system had drawn participants from all cultural and ethnic groups that had inhabited the region. Dr. Thornfield's report, submitted to the federal agencies monitoring the site, included detailed analysis of inscriptions found on the stone formations that appeared to record the names and service periods of individual guardians. These records, carved in multiple languages and writing systems, provided a chronicle of the Guardian tradition that extended far beyond documented history. The inscriptions revealed that the Guardian system had experienced periods of crisis throughout its history, times when the number of active Guardians had fallen below critical levels and the protective barriers had begun to weaken. During these periods, the records indicated, emergency measures had been implemented to recruit additional guardians and strengthen the containment systems. One such crisis had occurred during the late 1800s, corresponding to the period when the Holloway brothers had first begun documenting unusual activity in the region. The inscriptions suggested that the brothers' transformation had been part of a larger recruitment effort designed to address a critical shortage of guardians during a period of increased instability. The historical records also revealed that the guardian system had evolved over time, adapting to changes in human society and technology while maintaining its essential protective functions. Early guardians appear to have operated according to purely spiritual or shamanic traditions, while more recent participants had incorporated scientific methods and modern equipment into their monitoring activities. This evolution suggested that the guardian role was not static, but required continuous adaptation to address new types of threats and changing conditions in the boundary regions. The Holloway brothers had represented a transitional generation, combining traditional knowledge with emerging scientific understanding to develop new approaches to guardian work. Dr. Thornfield's discoveries also shed light on the selection process for potential guardians, revealing that certain bloodlines and family groups had contributed multiple individuals to the guardian system over generations. The genetic analysis of remains found at the sites indicated that guardian candidates often shared specific genetic markers that might predispose them to the psychological and physiological changes required for transformation. This genetic component explained why the Cherokee communities had traditionally served as intermediaries in the guardian selection process, as their oral traditions preserved knowledge about which family lines were most likely to produce suitable candidates. The tribal records maintained by Cherokee elders contained genealogical information spanning centuries that could be used to identify potential guardians within the contemporary population. The federal investigation into these discoveries led to the establishment of a comprehensive database tracking the descendants of known guardian families, with the goal of identifying individuals who might be suitable for recruitment if the current crisis required expansion of the guardian network. This database incorporated both Cherokee genealogical records and genetic analysis of materials recovered from the archaeological sites. The database revealed that potential guardian candidates were distributed throughout the North American population, often in families that had no conscious knowledge of their connection to the guardian tradition. Many of these individuals had experienced unusual phenomena throughout their lives, including enhanced sensitivity to environmental changes, prophetic dreams, and encounters with unexplained entities. Psychological profiles of confirmed guardian descendants revealed common characteristics, including heightened empathy, strong protective instincts, resistance to conventional authority structures, and a tendency towards solitary behavior. These individuals often felt drawn to remote wilderness areas and reported feeling most comfortable in environments where the boundary between civilization and nature was ambiguous. The identification of these potential candidates had become increasingly urgent as the monitoring systems established throughout the boundary regions reported accelerating instability. The traditional guardian network, while still functional, was showing signs of strain under the pressure of unprecedented environmental and social changes. Climate change had emerged as a particularly significant factor, as shifting weather patterns and ecosystem disruptions were affecting the delicate balance that the guardians worked to maintain. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns were altering the flow of energy through the boundary regions, requiring constant adjustments to containment protocols. Industrial development and urban expansion were creating additional challenges by introducing electromagnetic interference and chemical contamination that disrupted the natural systems the guardians relied upon for monitoring and control. The expansion of communication networks and satellite coverage was also making it more difficult to maintain the secrecy that had traditionally protected guardian operations. Perhaps most significantly, the increasing global population and the spread of information technology were making it harder to prevent unauthorized access to boundary regions. Social media and GPS technology enabled amateur explorers to locate and share information about remote areas that had previously been protected by their inaccessibility. These developments had led to a series of security breaches that threatened to expose the Guardian system to public scrutiny and potentially destabilize the protective barriers that depended on maintaining specific conditions of secrecy and isolation. The Guardians were being forced to develop new methods for managing these threats while continuing their essential monitoring functions. The federal agencies responsible for supporting Guardian operations had responded by implementing expanded security protocols and developing new technologies designed to complement traditional Guardian methods. These efforts included the deployment of advanced sensor networks and the development of cover stories to explain unusual activity in boundary regions. However, the most promising development was the emergence of a new generation of Guardian candidates who possessed skills and knowledge that previous generations had lacked. These individuals, often with backgrounds in technology, environmental science, or alternative spirituality, were able to bridge the gap between traditional Guardian wisdom and contemporary understanding of complex systems. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a systems analyst who had been recruited for Guardian training after displaying unusual sensitivity to electromagnetic anomalies, reported that the new generation of Guardians was developing hybrid approaches that combined ancient techniques with modern scientific methods. These approaches showed promise for addressing threats that neither traditional nor purely scientific methods could handle effectively. Rodriguez's work focused on developing mathematical models that could predict and potentially prevent the type of catastrophic breaches that the original Guardian system had been designed to contain. Her research suggested that the boundary regions operated according to principles that could be understood through advanced physics and systems theory, even though they involved phenomena that current scientific paradigms could not fully explain. The integration of scientific analysis with traditional Guardian practices was producing insights that neither approach could achieve independently. Rodriguez and her colleagues were discovering that the boundary regions functioned as complex adaptive systems that responded to both physical and consciousness-based interventions. This understanding was leading to the development of new Guardian techniques that could be taught more systematically than traditional methods, potentially enabling the training of larger numbers of Guardians in shorter time periods. The emergency protocols being developed by federal agencies incorporated these new training methods as contingency measures for rapid Guardian recruitment if the current crisis escalated. The success of these hybrid approaches had also generated new hope for the long-term sustainability of the Guardian system. Previous generations of Guardians had faced the prospect of permanent separation from normal human society, but the new methods suggested that future Guardians might be able to maintain connections to both worlds while still fulfilling their protective functions. This possibility was particularly significant for the Cherokee communities that had traditionally supplied Guardian candidates, as it offered the potential for cultural continuity that previous generations had been forced to sacrifice. The new approaches respected traditional wisdom while providing opportunities for adaptation that could ensure the survival of Guardian knowledge through changing social conditions. The implications of these developments extended far beyond the immediate crisis in the Ozark region. Similar boundary areas existed throughout the world, and the techniques being developed in response to the American situation were beginning to be applied to Guardian systems in other countries and cultures. International cooperation in Guardian operations was revealing that the phenomena contained in boundary regions were part of a global system that required coordinated management to maintain planetary stability. The sacrifice of individuals like the Holloway brothers was being replicated by Guardians in remote regions of every continent, all working to maintain the delicate balance that made normal human civilization possible. The global scope of the Guardian network highlighted the universal nature of the calling that had drawn the Holloway brothers to their transformation. Their experience was not unique, but representative of a pattern of human evolution that was occurring wherever the boundaries between different types of reality required active maintenance. The story of the three brothers who vanished in the Ozarks had thus become part of a larger narrative about humanity's role in maintaining cosmic equilibrium. Their sacrifice had established precedents that were being followed by individuals throughout the world, all accepting the responsibility of serving as bridges between different levels of existence. As the Guardian network continued to evolve and expand, the legacy of the Holloway brothers remained central to understanding the nature of the calling that drew certain individuals to accept transformation in service of their communities. Their story provided both inspiration and practical guidance for the new generation of guardians who were taking up the watch in increasingly challenging circumstances. The mountains of the Ozarks continue to hold their secrets, but those secrets are now understood to be part of a global mystery that touches every culture and every generation. The Holloway brothers and their fellow guardians maintain their vigil not just over their local boundary region, but as part of a planetary network of protectors ensuring the stability of reality itself. Their transformation from missing persons to eternal guardians represents the potential that exists within all humanity to evolve beyond normal limitations when the need arises. The macabre case of the Holloway brothers stands as testament to the reality that some individuals are called to serve in ways that transcend death itself, and that such service provides the foundation upon which all human civilization ultimately depends.